This is New Zealand in the background, this is my brother and I in the foreground, and in this video I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about how to plan a campervan trip through New Zealand. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're like me, you've always dreamed about going to New Zealand, but you never found the time or the money until one day you stopped dreaming about those mountains, the rivers, the streams, the beautiful scenery, and the sheep, and you turned it into reality. This video will be broken down into 5 segments, and I'm going to tell you absolutely everything you need to know about how to plan this campervan trip. Stick around to the end. I'll give you some tips on how to make this trip as epic as possible, and I will tell you what I would have done differently on this road trip. So before we get into the first segment, I just got back from a 2-week road trip through South Island, New Zealand. I spent 9 days with my brother and then 5 days with my best friend and her family. It was an incredible trip. I'm so happy that I was able to visit New Zealand, and I'm so grateful that I was able to see all of this stunning beauty. I spent so much time researching that trip. I learned so much from that trip, and I spent so much time planning for this video. So I hope that it will help you out in your own journey and in planning your own trip. Hit the subscribe button and let's get into it. Segment 1 is the planning phase. The first thing that you need to do is determine if you would rather visit the North Island or the South Island in New Zealand. The North Island is known for its beaches, its geothermal activity, its urban landscapes, and its slightly warmer weather. The South Island is known for its mountains, its hiking, its remote locations, its fjords, its glaciers, and its adventurous activities. Second, you need to figure out how much time you can actually dedicate to this beautiful, beautiful country. Let me just warn you right off the bat, unless you're going to spend an extended amount of time in this country, you're going to have to pick and choose the places that you're going to visit, and it's going to be difficult. As a side note, you could visit both islands, but unless you have an extended amount of time, I highly recommend that you just choose one island and you dedicate all of your time to that one island. So once you've chosen where you're going to spend your time, and then you've decided how much time you're going to spend, the third thing that you're going to do is actually conduct research. My tips here are to utilize your friends and your family and talk to people who know people that have been to New Zealand and figure out what they've done and figure out what they would suggest to you. Then go online and read travel blogs. There's so much information out there about New Zealand and people talking about their experiences there. Once you start to talk to people and read things, then you can begin to get an idea of what an experience in New Zealand is like. Pay attention to the things and the places that stand out, and then you can begin to narrow down your list. In addition to that, you're going to have to conduct research on campervans, but that's the entire next segment, so I'll wait a minute to talk about that, but stick around. Once you start getting a rough idea of where things are located and the time it's going to take to get there and what type of transportation they're going to have, the fourth thing that you're going to do is you're going to form your itinerary. Now this will be a rough sketch. It doesn't have to be completely set out unless that's your style of travel, but to give you an example, my brother and I created a shared note on our iPhones, and we would add to it anytime we conducted research, and then slowly but surely an idea started to form about where we could visit, and a route started to actually form on a map that we were dropping pins. This step was crucial to be able to figure out which direction we would go and if it made sense with our campervan. Segment 2 is going to be dedicated to campervans. This will be an important part of the trip because this is going to be your transportation and will help you get from point A to point B. There are so many different types of transportation that you can go with in New Zealand, and I'm going to cover the range from budget all the way to luxury. Starting with budget, your option will be sleeper vans. They're just like what they sound. They're solely meant to sleep and to get you from one point to the next. They offer a little bit of storage for clothes and some food, but that's about it. Pros would be that it's easy to get around and they are budget friendly. Cons would be that you don't have a lot of storage, and more importantly, you don't have a shower or a bathroom, so very important to consider. Right in the middle, and in my opinion, the sweet spot, are the fully self-contained campervans. This is the option that my brother and I went with, and if you have the money or if you've saved for this trip, which you absolutely should do, this is the option to go with. So a fully self-contained campervan means that it comes with electricity, it comes with water, it has a bathroom, it has a kitchenette, it has a bed, and you can actually go wherever you want and enjoy the outdoors and the nature of New Zealand. These campervans come with tanks that hold your water, and they also store your water that you're using in the bathroom or for doing dishes at the sink, and you will have to manage these things like dumping the water out or refilling your water or charging up your campervan, but it really makes for an amazing trip and really grants you the freedom that you want on a trip like this. Pros would be that you have access to freedom camping. Freedom camping means that you can go and stay in any of the spots that the New Zealand government has dedicated as a camping place. Sometimes, most of the time, it's actually in the middle of nowhere, and these are the beautiful places that you really want to spend time in and get connected to nature with. Another pro would be that there's so much great infrastructure in New Zealand for these kinds of road trips. New Zealand is made for road tripping, hence why you're watching this video. And so it is a major plus to be able to get a camper van that's fully self-contained and just to get on the road and go. Some cons would be that it's more expensive than a sleeper. They're quite big to drive, and sometimes it's a little bit painful to try and find parking if you're in a city. Other than that, I highly recommend this camper van option that is fully self-contained because it really gives you the freedom and you just get to go on the road and enjoy New Zealand. On the other end of the scale, you really have the luxury RVs. Consider this if you have a lot of people in your group, if you really value space and comfortability, maybe you're not moving at such a fast pace. This really is an option for the people that don't have to worry about the money. It's an option, but if you're trying to travel on a budget or if you just need the bare minimum, consider the sleeper van or the fully self-contained camper van. If you'd like some tips on conducting your research on camper vans, there were many different types of camper vans that I saw when I was traveling throughout New Zealand, but the three most popular that I saw were Juicy, Jucy, Mad Campers, which is the one that we went with, and then Maui. Moving right along, segment 3 is going to be about costs. Let's get into the good stuff. Now, take this with a grain of salt. This is going to depend on how you spend money. It's going to depend on where you're coming from in the world, and it's going to depend on what you actually do in the country. But I will break down my expenses for this trip so you just get a rough idea of how much it costs, and then you can figure out your own budget. So I live in Brazil. I flew from a small city in Brazil to a small city in New Zealand. So it took me 4 flights and 48 hours just to get there, and it cost me $2,000. The camper van itself was quite expensive as well. We spent $2,500 on our camper van, but it was a fully self-contained vehicle with Mad Campers, and it had a bed, a kitchenette, it had water, it had electricity, and it had everything that we needed. And so we really were paying for the convenience. So my brother and I ended up spending $1,700 on food, gas, campsites, and other miscellaneous things like entrance tickets or activities or our visas, all those little things that really add up, total to be about $1,700. So the grand total for this trip for my personal expenses, after splitting the camper van, the food, and the gas, and those expenses with my brother, came out to be a little over 4,000 USD. That is a lot of money, but I spent the better part of a year saving for this trip so that when I went to New Zealand, I could enjoy everything that I wanted to. Moving right along, you're now getting one step closer to your dream trip in New Zealand. Segment 4 will be about packing. Now, once again, this will be dependent on you. Who are you as a traveler? What do you prefer to travel with? And what activities are you going to do in New Zealand? This all influences what you pack into your bags. Now check out this list that my brother and I created for our packing trip. You'll see some essentials, but you also see some other things like gear. My brother and I are super adventurous and outdoorsy people, and we really wanted to spend all the time that we could outside doing activities that we love. Things we were considering doing were hiking, surfing, spearfishing, fishing, and all of these other outdoors activities. And so we felt like we could bring our gear to save some costs and also just be ready to go and do whatever we wanted. Looking back at the trip in hindsight, we could have brought maybe half of the stuff and still been good to go. The things that I will highlight that you need and that are useful: a headlamp is always useful for being able to see in the dark. Just in case you don't have any power, it's hard for you to see inside of your camper van, a headlamp is always a good thing to have. Power banks are always useful for traveling in general when you're on planes. It's also useful when you're in the middle of nowhere. Maybe you don't have access to power in your car, or you just need some juice when you're hiking. Another thing is bug spray. Sandflies are a huge issue in New Zealand, and they're quite annoying. You can definitely buy the spray when you go to New Zealand, but it's just something to keep in mind. Make sure you buy some, make sure you have the space for it, and make sure you apply it often. Since we went to the South Island and hiking was one of our main activities, layers were super important. There's a lot of different weather that we encountered on this trip, and so being prepared with all of those layers was really helpful. Okay, segment 5 will be the must-see things in South Island, New Zealand, and also my absolute you cannot miss tips for planning your own road trip through New Zealand. So regarding places that you can't miss in South Island, New Zealand, you will probably come across these in your own research, but I want to reaffirm how incredible these places are. Mount Cook. Mount Cook is one of the tallest mountains in New Zealand. It might be the tallest mountain in New Zealand, and it is completely stunning. and just filled with so many landscapes and colors and scenery and just beauty. I was in awe the entire time that I was hiking through these mountains, and it ended up being one of the highlights of the trip for my brother and I. Another place is Milford Sound. This is arguably one of the most famous parts of New Zealand. It is in Fiordland National Park. One interesting thing about Milford Sound and all of the other sounds in this park, I believe they're around 14 to 15, is that they are not actually sounds, which are valleys created due to weather erosion. They are actually all fjords, hence the name Fiordland National Park. Fjords are valleys that are created by glaciers and are then filled by seawater. Next up, you also got Queenstown. So checking out some of the cities. Queenstown is a very unique city. It's got about 15,000 people, and it's situated between mountains and water and is a truly magical place. It's really cool because it's this weird eclectic vibe of international tourists, but also alpine mountain towns, and it's just filled with adventurous activities. Another place that I would recommend is Wanaka. This is a much smaller town, somewhat near Queenstown. It's situated on a lake as well, and it's a very charming town. It's nice to be able to relax by the lake, to kayak on the lake, and they also have really good food. My friends and I had an amazing meal in the city, and overall the charm was something that made us really happy and worthwhile for our visit. Lastly, I would recommend going off the beaten path and checking out the small towns. These are the major attractions that everyone in the world wants to see when they come to New Zealand, but there are so many other places on these islands that offer so much, and so I would highly recommend trying to talk to people or doing a little bit extra research to figure out what other off the beaten path towns would be worth visiting. Some of our favorite places that we visited were ones that were just random campsites that we needed to go to. They were maybe 15 minutes to an hour outside of what our main destination was, and they ended up being so peaceful and beautiful, and places honestly that we never would have visited otherwise. So I would definitely recommend trying to go off the beaten path. Now for the grand finale, my tips on how to make your trip as epic as possible. Thank you so much if you've rode it out with me this far. My first tip is to plan half of your trip in advance and then leave the other half open-ended. This is a rule that I like to follow for most of my traveling. I usually plan the first few days and then I just go with the wind. New Zealand has so much to offer, and it would be a shame if you were there and you had this day-by-day itinerary that you couldn't venture off of. Give yourself some flexibility and allow life to happen and for you to discover things maybe you wouldn't have expected to otherwise. Second major tip, and my brother and I had to learn the hard way for this one, is to book your campsites in advance. My brother and I made the mistake of going too with the flow, and considering that it was summer in New Zealand, considering that it was high season and there were so many tourists, there were multiple times on our journey where we tried to book a campsite in a city or a place that we were going, and there was nothing in the place, not even an hour away from the place. Third pro tip is to download the following apps which will help you on your journey. The first is Campermate. Campermate is an amazing app that is very popular in New Zealand, and it's specifically for road trips. This tells you where all the campsites are at, powered sites, unpowered sites, freedom camping, everything you need to know about places that you can go and stay legally. This app has it all. Another app that you will want to download is AllTrails, which is popular all over the world. This is great for offline maps, for hiking, and you can find all the trails that you need in New Zealand on this app. And another personal favorite app that you can download is Maps.me. This is offline maps in general. This app has never let me down. I've been in the most remote locations in random countries, and I can trust Maps.me to tell me where to go on a certain road. And lastly, little bonus tip for you, consider the city that you're going to fly into. This obviously affects the price of your ticket, and you most likely will go with the cheaper option. But looking back on my trip, my brother and I did a giant loop starting in Christchurch and then ending in Christchurch. And looking back on the trip, I was speaking with my friend who I also traveled with. It would have been interesting to maybe consider flying into Queenstown as opposed to Christchurch, because most of the locations that we wanted to see and visit were in the southwestern part of the island. And if we had flown into Queenstown, then it might have made more sense to be able to visit some other parts of the southern island. So that's a wrap. I understand that may have been a little overwhelming, but the idea behind this video was that you have your one-stop shop on all the things that you need to know and consider really before planning this trip. I remember when I was planning this trip with my brother, it was super exciting, but it was also overwhelming because there's so much information everywhere. Sometimes the information is conflicting, sometimes the information is not even clear, but Hopefully you stumble across this video because you have a dream of visiting New Zealand and I can answer a lot of these questions. I would love to know in the comments, where are you thinking of going? Do you have any other questions about this trip? I love this country. It is one of the most beautiful places I've ever been, and I can talk about it for days and in the coming years. Thank you for watching my video. I look forward to hearing from you, and I'll see you next week in next week's video.